Hello again, Struckwop. Here I am with another Diablo 4 Season of Blood Season 2 related info video. And this one will cover the tons, loads of upcoming quality of life changes. And here I would say the majority of those changes should have been there when the game launched. There is no excuse for why those weren't there. But since it's going to be most likely a longer video than the others, I'll try to be as fast as possible with delivering the info. So I'm not gonna do the usual intro. Diablo 4 second season begins on October 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. I'm not gonna speak much about that season, I've got other videos about it. What I will do right now in this intro is tell you all the things that we'll be covering in this video. We'll cover general quality of life improvements, towns and vendors related improvements, mount changes, nightmare dungeons and nightmare dungeon affliction related changes, world events such as the world bosses and the hell tides and the Legion events. And keep in mind, I've got a video regarding world bosses, which has more details for those. Then there will be activity rewards. Again, activities, those world activities and stuff. There's going to be monster rebalance changes, UI, UX, and accessibility changes, stash filtering and improvements, and then loot related general changes, enchanting, gems, crafting materials. So you see there's a lot of things. So in some cases there will be text on screen. I will be using the official developer highlights, but I will also make my own highlights from the patch notes and include some text on screen info with those. So buckle up, struck up, and let's go. I think it's best to kick things off with the general improvements. For example, the scrolls of escape are now consumed if a hardcore player disconnects during combat. Incenses now grant a bonus of experience and persists after death. 10 unlocked waypoints, 2 per region, will be there when you start this season. There will also be renown rewards persisting, and keep in mind that this is just the rewards and not the completion done to earn them. So we would still have to do each dungeon once for the Codex of Power entries. Even though we would still have our renown rewards, we would still need to grind the things that normally would give you renown, because the things that get rewarded other than the renown you would still need. Then overworld monsters in World Tier 3 and 4 no longer trail the player's level. And then there's additional 2 character slots, which for me is quite a joke, to not give us 5 temporary seasonal new slots each season, 1 for each class. They need to separate character slots from seasonal character slots. They need to make something called seasonal character slots. 2 additional character slots will not be enough. It's better than nothing, but I think it would be best if each season we get 5 temporary separate character slots that later we won't be able after the migration to use. Now, there's some missed things I want to include here. For example, Necrominions and Druid Companions are much less likely to target invulnerable enemies. Regarding the Renown rewards, again, I mentioned that. There's changes to overpower related stuff, like effects that guarantee an overpower on your next cast will always be consumed on the next appropriate cast, regardless of whether a target is hit. If you have multiple of such effects active, you only will be consuming one of those. Then the level of which a player will receive the priority quest for unlocking the next world tier difficulty has been increased. World tier 3 is from 40 to 48, world tier 4 from 60 to 68. Keep in mind, players are free to attempt the capstone dungeon at any level, but the developers have raised the level at which the player is prompted to attempt it, to prevent players feeling encouraged to attempt challenges that might be too difficult for them at that point in the game. Then rewards for completing side quests have been improved to scale with the higher world tiers. There's increases to Veiled Crystal drops from salvage caches, slightly increased rare and rare ore drops from salvage caches, and salvage caches will now also contain an item. Effects of various traps in the world have been adjusted. I'm not going to go in detail regarding that. And then there were increases to monster density for the following events: Soul Survivor, Cursed Shrine, Nest, Rest of the Weary, Immolation, Eternal Torment, Wayward Soul. Then also increase the speed of progression for the following events, which is the time between waves, time to start, and time to end. For Last Stand, Wandering Soul, Soul Survivor, Cursed Shrine, Rest of the Weary, and Wayward Soul. So health of the stranded NPCs that need to be protected to achieve mastery goals for events, now scales better in high level areas of dungeons to increase their survivability. In the event a hardcore player disconnects while in combat, a scroll of escape will automatically be consumed and teleport them to a safe location, as I mentioned earlier. Now, regarding towns and vendors, there are certain things worth mentioning, such as the occultist is now setting up shop at the Tree of Whispers waypoint, such as additional stashes being added to capital cities near important vendors and/or waypoints. Then the Gambler / Purveyor of Curiosities NPCs, those have been moved closer to the waypoints in Kyovashad, Zerbin Zet, Ketbardu, and Geaku. Then the following waypoints, actually, I'm not going to mention the waypoints, but the following areas will have two additional waypoints unlocked for characters that skip the campaign, and that would be each area. Dry Steps, Fractured Peaks, Hawazar, Kegistan, Skulls Glam. Two waypoints for each of those, and that's pretty good to have those. Next up, changes to mounts. First of all, there's changes to responsiveness, speed, and cooldown. Regarding responsiveness, mounts will be less likely to get stuck or slow down unexpectedly, plus improved mounts automatically jumping over traversal. Regarding speed, the base speed is increased by 14%. Top speed is unchanged. Achieving full speed with mouse and keyboard has been improved, and the speed boost from spur duration lasts 50% longer. Using spur breaks through barricades as well, a great change there. Regarding cooldown, for example, manual dismount is changed from 10 seconds to 5. Forced dismount from 30 to 15. Dismount with a combat skill from 10 to 3 seconds cooldown. Overall, very good changes for that, and I think many of you would like that, me including. Next up, changes to Nightmare Dungeons. There is a bunch of them, but let's mention the highlights. For example, teleporting to Nightmare Dungeons now actually ports you inside instead of outside of the Nightmare Dungeon, which again should have been logically there when they implemented that feature. Big mess up, thankfully they finally owned up to it. Events. Dungeon events, monster density has been increased, and NPCs no longer get one shot in the higher world tiers. The overall readability and improvement and crowd control has been greatly reduced for traps, and the crowd control reduction is not just traps but overall. Crowd control in general will last less longer than before. Then there's improvements to Paragon Glyph experience. And then regarding objectives, objectives have been completely removed from a bunch of dungeons, and it is now just finding the boss as an objective for those. Objectives have been placed on the main / critical path through the dungeon where applicable. And again, keep in mind some dungeons will still have objectives while others will have just kill the boss, find the boss and kill it. Dungeon layouts have also been redesigned in many dungeons, and there's additional changes made to dungeon layouts to limit backtracking while making sure dungeons don't feel too linear. Now, something worth mentioning here would be regarding Nightmare Dungeon Affliction changes. And I will just open some images. You should be seeing those on your screen. First of all, there's the backstabbers, the monster critical resist, and the death pools in the first image that have been changed. And as you can see on the screen, this is some good improvements, nerfs, buffs, whatever. So the players will benefit from those changes to backstabbers, monster critical, and death pools. Two other highlighted from the developers: Lightning Storm, Drifting Shade. You can see some nice changes to those have been done for sure. Overall, I'm happy with those, and I think many of you would agree with me here. There's things, for example, that changed to monster overpower resist, potion breakers, poisonous evade, resistance breaker, and thorns. I can give you the details for all of that, but I can give you plenty of other information. Keep in mind that nightmare CGUs will now be rewarded upon completing a nightmare dungeon instead of only after defeating the final boss. Another thing worth mentioning is that monsters in Season of Blood Nightmare dungeons will spawn closer to the entrance. This is meant to help reduce the amount of walking needed before your first encounter in the dungeon. Then another thing worth mentioning is I already said the glyph experience has been increased across the board with a significant increase at earlier tiers. Overall glyph experience across all tiers is 19%, which is a joke. Should have been more like 50 plus percent increase overall. Many dungeons have received visual updates and layout improvements. And here's a note from the devs. They've received feedback that some dungeons lacked visual diversity and required quite a bit of backtracking to complete, making them feel cumbersome. We believe our adjustments to dungeons in these areas will remedy player frustration, but we'll continue to listen to community feedback and make additional changes as needed. And there's a bunch of other changes they didn't mention. Next up, let's talk about world events, such as world bosses and legion events. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I have a separate video for world bosses. So I'm only going to mention one thing about those. World boss spawns reduced from 6 to 3.5 hours. You can check my 5 new Uber bosses video for more details regarding world bosses and Uber bosses and stuff like that. Now, moving on to legion events, there are some interesting changes. The time between Legion events has been reduced from 30 minutes to 25 minutes. So each 25 minutes, boom, a Legion event. Every Legion event will now have a Whisper objective associated with it. Additional life scaling for Legion event monsters has been increased. And the developer note here is that they've received feedback that players don't often fight monsters during Legion events because of the monsters dying too quickly. And here they say we have increased the health of those monsters to compensate, adding a little bit of extra difficulty for Legion events. And then the experience reward for completing a Legion event has been increased by 75%, which overall seems like a great improvement. And Legion events were already a good way to level up until like level 70, 75. Now it's even better. And speaking of rewards, let's talk about that. Activity rewards. And for example, let's start with this. The tier for Nightmare CGUs rewarded from Whisper caches will now always be within 5 levels of the highest level Nightmare dungeon the player has completed. The developer note about this is that CGU levels will still respect the maximum and minimum levels determined by your active world tier. Gold rewards from Whisper caches greatly increased. I wonder what that greatly would mean. Experience from Whispers / Helltide have been increased substantially. I wonder what that would mean. Whisper caches adhere to the item SWOT of the cache. Whisper caches will now reward significantly more gold and increased gem fragments. Helltide chests now have specific icons on the map to indicate their type, which is great news. Various quality of life updates for Whispers, such as moving the altars to bring collected resources to a more central location and reducing the number of monsters needed to be slain to complete certain objectives. And additionally to that, silent chests can now spawn in areas where Helltide is active. Next up, a little bit about monster rebalanced related quality of life. All monsters and bosses across the game have been rebalanced around all the other changes slated for Season of Blood to ensure the overall difficulty of the game does not drastically change. Level scaling in the open world has been adjusted. Levels of the monsters encountered in the open world will scale with the player's level, with a minimum and maximum level determined by the world tier. World tiers 1 and 2 are levels 1 and 50, between 1 to 50. World tier 3, minimum 55, maximum 70. World tier 4, minimum 75, maximum 100. So there have been generally reduced, they've generally reduced the evasiveness of many monsters. The cooldown for teleport cast by night monsters has been increased and the range has been decreased. The spider host cold explosion now chills instead of freezes. The bolted corpse fiend death explosion no longer has knockback. Spider host, bolted corpse fiend, and fly hosts will no longer spawn in the fire enchanted or plague bearer affixes. The Searing Abomination's ground slam ability now also spawns a poison pool under the player. Under the player, that's fucking annoying. That's not quality of life. Um, Ghost monsters have received a visual upgrade. Now we move on to user interface, user experience, and accessibility. Mark as favorite and junk in stash and the inventory has been added as a function. Extracted aspects with the same legendary power will now be grouped together. Great change. Again, should have been there on launch. Sorting of normal affixes on items has been improved and is more consistent. Dungeon map tooltips with an active whisper associated with them will now display the aspect name and description earned when completing that dungeon. There's been streamer mode that's added to the game, and combat text can now be hidden. Things like vulnerable, dodge, fortified, etc. There's an outrun function that has been added to the game that many of you might like, and the minimap has been zoomed out, which I also like. I mean, it would be nice to have a way to zoom in, zoom out as much as. But we'll see how far it goes. But I like being able to zoom in and out of my minimap to fix it to the way I want to. Regarding accessibility, they've added more cursor icon options, including higher contrast icons, and this can be found in the accessibility options menu. Then they've added an audio cue to signal when you are near a traversal, for example, a ladder or broken bridge to jump over. Items can now be marked as favorite, as I mentioned, and items marked this way cannot be sold or salvaged. Items in the stash can now be marked as junk or favorite as well. And the stash can now be searched and filtered to more quickly find items, which is something again that should have been on launch. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But it's overall one of the best things that they could do to stashes and stuff. Using the sell all junk option, we will now only sell junk in the active inventory tab. Keep that in mind. Extracted aspects with the same legendary power will now be grouped together, as I mentioned, when sorted in the inventory and stash. The sorting of normal affixes on items has been improved to be more consistent. And the developer's note here is that affix sorting has been curated to more deliberately sort similar affixes together. So certain things will always go at the top, certain things in the middle, certain things in the bottom when compared to each other in terms of affix placement. Dungeons that have active whispers associated with them will now display the aspect name and description on the map tooltip. And yeah, I think I've already mentioned those things. They've also added an in-game announcement for upcoming world boss spawns, and the visual effect on the map to denote active Helltide is now also shown on the minimap. And the minimap again has been zoomed out. They don't mention how much. And then 2 additional character slots have been added. And I already said that it's a joke to just give us additional character slots rather than just give us 1 slot for each class, 5 in the current state of the game per season. I think that's what they need to work on the next season to make that each season you get X amount of character slots seasonal and X equals the number of playable classes if someone wants to make one of each. 3 new icons have been added for Helltide chests on the map, one for jewelry, armor, and weapons. So whether it's a one-handed or two-handed weapon, you still wouldn't know. And what type of armor, you still wouldn't know unless you go to it and hover over it. Now, a little bit regarding the stash filtering. As you can probably see right now on your screen, the stash filtering has the filters at the bottom, where you can see you can filter by weapon or armor, whether it's weapon or armor, whether it's accessory, whether it's got a socket or is a socketable, whether it's a consumable, and something else that I'm not sure what it could be, probably the vampiric powers. Then you have the rarity. You have filter blue, yellow, legendary, unique, and then you can filter whether it is ancestral or sacred. And once you pick a certain type of filtering, it only shows you things that have this type of filter applied on them. So if you select legendaries, it only shows legendaries. If you select only weapons, it shows weapons. If you select only legendary weapons, it will show you those, which is pretty decent. And again, something that should have been there when the game launched. One step forward. Hopefully they keep giving us more regarding that, because there is also a search option. You can also search something specifically. So for example, you need to look for something that has blood on it, in the name, or in the description, or you may be looking for something with shadow damage or shadow bonuses. You can do that thankfully now. Now comes loot related quality of life changes, and let's start with the more general stuff. There is a lot to cover. 12 new unique items harboring immense power have been unearthed just in time for the Season of Blood. Those new unique items can only be acquired from playing on World Tier 4 in either the Eternal or Seasonal realm. Additionally, 7 new legendary powers have been added, 2 generic ones and 1 for each class. Then to add to the build diversity, there are also 10 new Paragon glyphs that you can find, 2 for each class. All of those will be covered in detail in a future standalone video. Unique, legendary, Paragon glyphs, etc. Whisper caches will now always only reward items of the specified equipment slot instead of having a chance to include a random item of any equipment slot. The drop chance of scroll of escape has been reduced from 0.1 to 0.025, so 1/4 of the previous. Fiend Roses and Forgotten Souls are no longer required to open non-sacred, to upgrade, to upgrade non-sacred or ancestral items. The item power ranges for sacred and ancestral items have been adjusted. For example, for Sacred, it used to be 625, 720, now it's 625, 750. Ancestral used to be 725, 820, now is 780, 925. Level scaling examples. Note this is item power range for items dropped from monsters of the listed level. Sacred. Level 55 is 625, 700, 56, 627, 702, 70, 655, 730. For Ancestral, at level 75 is 780, 855. At 76, 782, 857. At 100, it's 830, 925. Post level 100, it keeps growing by 1, but not the maximum. The maximum remains 925. So at 101, it's 831, 925. And 102, 832, 925. And so on. The acquisition rate of Forgotten Souls from salvaging has been adjusted. A massive nerf here. Salvaging a sacred item has a 5% chance to grant a Forgotten Soul. Salvaging an ancestral item has a 10% chance to grant a Forgotten Soul. Two-handed weapons can grant up to 2 Forgotten Souls from salvage. All other equipment types can grant 1. Forgotten Souls, here's the developer note. Forgotten Souls became much easier to get in Season of the Malignant. Helltide was designed to be the primary source of Forgotten Souls, but being able to acquire them through other means disincentivized players from playing Helltide. And the developers want to encourage players to participate in Helltide more, but do not want to completely shut down alternative sources of Forgotten Souls. So they have broadened the types of items that can grant Forgotten Souls when salvaged, but decreased the drop rate. Previously, only weapons could provide them when salvaged, but it was a guarantee. I think it sucks. I think the 5, 10%, whatever, is shit rate. It should have been more like 33 to 50, between 33 and 50% chance should have been what it is. Right now it really sucks, but again, now people would do Helltides even more for those. The following loot adjustments have been implemented per world tier. In 1 and 2 unchanged. In 3, only legendary, unique, uber unique and sacred rare items will drop. Players will instead receive additional crafting resources if something would have dropped previously. In World Tier 4, only legendary, unique, uber unique and ancestral rares. Players will instead receive additional crafting resources. And then on top of that, gold drop rates have also been increased in World Tiers 3 and 4 to balance out these changes. Next up, we need to talk about enchanting improvements, enchanting related quality of life. Enchant cost is now determined by a coefficient of base item power and item type instead of the item's sell value. For rare items, this will generally result in a higher initial enchant cost, but subsequent enchanting will continue to escalate at a significantly reduced rate than prior. Enchant cost will be generally reduced across the board for legendary items. For example, when enchanting a rare ancestral wand with 750 base item power, prior to the Season of the Boot, it used to be first enchant 56,000, then 282,000, then 338,000. When enchanting the same wand during the Season of Blood and beyond, the first enchant will be 64,000. So from 56 to 64,000, you can see that initial increase, but then the second enchant is 128 instead of 282,000. And then the third one, instead of 338,000, it will be 193,000. So overall, it's better. I still don't like that there is an increase. I would much rather pay 100,000 instead of 56 or 64 for the first enchant, but I would like to pay that 100,000 all the way up without an increase, so that I don't end up breaking an item eventually because it's too expensive to enchant after 10 or 20 attempts. Because RNG sucks in this game when it comes to enchanting. Now, when enchanting a legendary wand with 800 base item power, prior to the Season of Blood, the first enchant would have been 164. Now, the first enchant would be 72,000. And additionally, imprinting, adding sockets, or upgrading will no longer increase the enchant cost. The note here from the devs is enchant being determined by sell value encouraged players to reroll a rare item before upgrading it at the blacksmith or imprinting an aspect on it. Yes, I agree here. I used to do that. The overall formula for enchant cost has been adjusted, so item adjustments need not be done in a specific order to be the most cost effective. Additionally, this change reduces overall cost incurred when rerolling an item. And now, one of the major reworks in this season is the gems. They promised that gems will no longer be as annoying as they used to be, and to a certain degree, they've achieved this. Not the best way of handling it, but still a decent way. Gems will no longer drop from regular sources and can instead be crafted at a jeweler. Previous gem sources now drop gem fragments, which are stored in the materials tab. Crafted gems can be salvaged back into gem fragments at a jeweler. So you craft some gems, you no longer need them, but you need some space and you don't want to use those gems up in your storage or inventory. You salvage them, you get fragments, and then you get those fragments to craft something else. The equivalent number of gem fragments will drop less frequently than gems did from regular sources, but more frequently from whisper caches. By moving gem acquisition to an active player action, they will now no longer passively fill your inventory, reducing stress on overall space. We are also weighting the equivalent drops more towards targeted rewards to reduce the potential frequency of checking the materials tab during regular play. The overall drop rate of elixirs has been reduced. The 0.5% chance of dropping from any monster has been reduced to 0.02, a massive decrease to elixirs because they want us to craft them. They're trying to reduce the stress on players' consumable inventory tab. Similar to our changes made for gems, we hope players will be interacting with elixirs they have purposefully crafted.
To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Struck up, keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.